Hello, welcome back to the course Site 101X on Technology Evaluation. I'm Dan Fry, and I'm going to be addressing the topic, developing a set of evaluation metrics. We know which product family we're going to evaluate, let's say. We may have already decided which products in the product family are going to be compared. Now the question is, what are we actually going to measure? Well, the answer to that question has a big impact. What are you going to measure? One thing that it does is it helps you to focus the evaluation effort. Once you've decided what the metrics are, the process that you follow out in the field and in the lab becomes much clearer. Also, once you've made those measurements, you should find that it provides the information that decision makers need. It guides the question, what am I going to buy? This is your chance to use your knowledge of the end users and their needs. So we've got the people that actually use the product. For example, here's a person in Uganda, and he is charging a solar lantern. The fact that he does it in this particular way on this particular surface may have relevance. But it's not enough just to know about the end users. We also need to understand the communities that are affected. We may need to understand not just the person who uses the solar lantern, but maybe the person who sells it. Maybe also the person who sells the competitive product, a kerosene lantern. Now, before you even get around to deciding on which things you're going to measure, you have to do some preparation. I think the most important thing is pull together a strong team. Get some people on your team who understand the technology. If you're going to be evaluating solar lanterns, bring in people who understand photovoltaics. Bring in some people who understand batteries and charging technology. But technology in itself is not sufficient. You also need people who understand the end users and the context. So make a balance there. Once you have that team together, you're probably going to want to do some interviews. Talk to people who are end users and make use of the product. Also talk to people in a position to make buying decisions. Interviews are great, but sometimes they're not enough. You may need to make direct observations of people using the product. In some cases, people have tacit knowledge of what they're going to do with the product and not always explicit. They won't tell you what they're going to do, but they can show you. Now, another suggestion I have concerns lead users, and I have a whole other slide on this, so let's go forward. Now, there's something called the lead user method. It's described in this citation here from Management Science in 1988. And in that paper, they discuss a case study about surgical draping. So here's an image about surgical draping. Let me tell you about this example. A lead user is someone who faces needs that will be in the general marketplace, but they see them earlier, and they're typical enough of the general marketplace that they can benefit from the solutions, but they're different. So let me give you an example. In surgical draping, 3M found it useful to talk to large animal veterinarians. Now, they're not the same as the target market for surgical draping, which was principally surgeons working on humans, but the large animal veterinarians, they had particularly challenging applications of surgical draping, and the environments they worked in some ways are much more difficult to keep aseptic, and it can be hard to avoid infections when you're working in a barn. So they really helped 3M to focus on the features of draping that would be useful. As to the method and its steps, I'll leave that for the paper. Now, let's say that you pull together a good team, you have people knowing the technology and the people, maybe some lead users, but now what do good metrics look like? How's that team going to pull together a set of good metrics? Well, first of all, good metrics are measurable. That should be obvious. But we're talking about not just the theoretical possibility of making the measurements, the fact that instruments exist for it. I'm talking about whether it's practical, whether it's cost effective, or in other cases where the data already exists so you don't even have to make a measurement. If those conditions are met, we'll say it's practically measurable. Now, relevance is something we always come back to. Are we answering the question, which product should be purchased, which provides the best performance and the best affordances. Those, of course, are very important and depend on context a great deal. A less obvious thing about good metrics is they really need to apply broadly. Just having the other two items here in a good metric is not sufficient. If a metric applies only to half of the product family, well, the problem is it will not allow a person to discriminate across all the products in that family. So preferably make sure that your metrics make sense in the context of every single product in the family that you're evaluating. Naturally, also, the metrics need to be understandable. The decision maker, when reading your report, should understand what it is you're trying to convey by these measures. And then there's reliability. That is not just about the measurement, but also its effects on the decision. If for some reason the metric that you're using easily allows people to bring in their biases, then maybe it's not a very reliable metric to include, not so much because the information is unreliable, but because its impacts on the decision are unreliable. Now, let me tell you that there are some things that are not necessarily metrics that we also want to attend to. Let me make a distinction between metrics and features. Metrics that we were interested in the solar lantern evaluation include charge time and brightness. So those are pretty clear. If I wanted to know what the Sun King Pro charge time was, we could go out into the lab or into the field and measure that it took 8.7 hours. For brightness, we were able to give the outstanding rating based on measurement of lumens in the lab. Now, there are other things, features, which we also attended to, which included, was there a battery charge indicator? Could you charge a cell phone? Now, those aren't metrics exactly, we won't call them that, but although you don't need to take a measurement, you should make note of their absence or presence. So, just to summarize, metrics you use are essential to your evaluation effort. In particular, they help to keep you focused. Bring together a good team. That will help you to make intelligent choices about the metrics and their formulation. When you do that, think about not just their ultimate impact and their rigor, but also whether the measurements are practical, because this can have a big impact on the cost effectiveness of your study. Always keep in mind relevance. You want to be answering the question, what should people buy? And I will mention that as you're developing a list of metrics, you have to cull it down as a practical matter. We recommend 7 to 12 metrics. Remember that your evaluation effort scales as the product of the number of metrics you evaluate and the number of products over which you evaluate those metrics. So you need to keep both of those under control. To get practice with this, please do the assignments that we've described associated with this particular subject. Thanks very much.